The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer. Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Renato knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong, but he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert. The Iblis Stone was hidden there. It was a dangerous artifact. It could corrupt its user into a bloodthirsty monster. Maybe he could find a way to use it, to take its power without surrendering to its wickedness. And also, his old friend Lupino needed rescuing. Of course, Renato had a pretty strong suspicion that Lupino had betrayed the rebellion. But could Renato really leave an old friend to the Ravens? The island was windswept desert. No one went there except ostriches and ostrich hunters. The Iblis Stone. It would whisper promises in his ear, offer him power for blood. But this time, Renato was sure he could master it. And so, Renato went ostrich hunting. Every child could sing verses about the Sky Ripper, but ancient codices held hints of other things. A stone that ate souls, a ruby that drank blood, a jewel only a righteous man could give away. Were all these things the Iblis Stone? Long hidden in a buried temple? Another ancient item that was only resurfacing now? Drawn up from the deeps by the Emperor's horrific rituals? Ooh, Renato loved to improve his gear. His mother had never let him wave his sword around at home. He guessed he was still compensating for that. What was he doing here? Last time, the stone had fought him for possession of his own soul. Ravens were already here, cawing in frustration. They were still searching for a way in. Good. And he hadn't come too late.
Nice. That could be useful.
When Renato went to the china shop, for some reason the owner was always nervous. Once you try it, you're hooked. Smelled burnt fur. His. I think this is yours, said Renato, but he couldn't hear his enemy's answer. Sensed the jewel's power. He had a feeling they were going to be great friends.
There had to be some way to use the Iblis Stone. It was old, wasn't it? People are so much cleverer now. And Renato was pretty sure he was cleverer than most people. He hadn't noticed that path before. Ravens at least could not get past this point. Obviously, the temple builders knew how to deal with tomb raiders. Imagine getting a horse up in one of these things. He will be cursing a blue streak.
It was a stone of the purest blackness. It reflected no light, like a void made It was the stone, eager, thirsty. That seemed tempting and terribly wrong. Zenobia was the Emperor's greatest general and a potent witch. But they had been close once, and he had a sneaking suspicion the gem would try to control him. Why not capture the core of Sky Ripper instead? It was the eye of a lost god torn out by the Transcendent Emperor to power his greatest weapon. "It's the core," said the stone anxiously.
But even though Renato knew how evil the gem was, he had a clever plan for dealing with it.
The stone bothered him. He hated being told what to do. Wasn't that why he joined the rebellion? Wasn't that why he'd refused to be a soldier? He'd agreed to come on board only if he could freelance. The stone felt a bit clingy, and he had a feeling it did not have his best interests at heart. The sage Calaveras had told him where to find the Sky Ripper, a weapon capable of challenging the gods. Even without its armature, the core would still possess great power. He would go there. The moment he landed the Farfarer, Reynardo had a rare feeling of regret. It's not too late, he thought. He could turn around and sail for Zenobia's island. He frowned. Wait a minute. He didn't want to kill Zenobia, did he? Sure, technically she was the enemy, but they'd been at Swordfu School together. They'd never been lovers, but somehow they'd been closer. She'd told him every secret about herself. Except the biggest one. That she was the Emperor's daughter. No. Kill Zenobia, whispered the stone. Before it's too late. Gone rather well, actually. Beautifully. Where was a bard when you needed one?
You almost never saw wild gogglers together like this. The toads had to train them not to peck each other to death. These had to be Imperial gogglers. That meant ravens were up ahead.
There was something sour in the air. Like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time. The stone hadn't lied about what it could do for him. With each raven he cut down, he felt a jolt of power flowing into his arm. "You're weak," whispered the stone. "The core will kill you." "Are you afraid of it?" "No, don't be ridiculous," it chuckled. But it's unstable. It will poison you so much as carry it, and if you try to use it, it will explode catastrophically. Reynardo did not trust rocks that talked in his head. He went onwards. Long live the Emperor! Called the ravens.
Of course there was a puzzle. You couldn't expect the Transcendent Emperor to bury a god's eye in a leather sack where anyone could pick it up. Cool. Wish I could do that.
As he approached the core, the stone became hysterical. "No, it's too
He had a sudden vision of plunging his gauntlet into the core and dying in anguish. That wasn't his vision, was it? The stone had sent him its darkest fears, hadn't it? He had a sudden impulse to do exactly that. He raised his right fist and plunged it into the core. There was a rush of light. He thought he could hear the stone screaming. And then he passed out. When Renato came to, the core was gone. But the Iblis stone was no longer black, but glowing with a blue light. And it was silent. "I can't hear you," he sang out, and "You?" It didn't answer. "Ha!" he said. He had defeated the demonic gem with the power of his mind. He felt invincible. It was time to attack the Imperial outpost on the Nexus. Take the battle to the enemy. But among the huge crystals, there was also an observatory. A wise man would probably ask the scientists exactly what he had first. How wise was he? As the Farfarer made its way toward the Nexus, Renato watched sparks fly out of the core. The Iblis stone sucked them in hungrily. You'd think the stone would want this kind of power, wouldn't it? Thought Renato. Well, the scientists would explain it all. This time, Renato was sure he'd figured out how to use the core safely. See? He'd trusted his gut, and it had worked out. That's what it meant to be a hero. To ignore the naysayers and the oddmakers, and do what you knew was right, and have it turn out to be the right thing. Well, he wasn't worried. Once he got to the observatory, the scientist Toads could explain it. Then he could carry the war into the enemy's camp and destroy them all. Dear, he was getting a little bloodthirsty, wasn't he? Renato wondered idly if people who had built these poles had really, really long tentacles. Renato had always wanted a flying carpet. This was more like a flying tabletop, but it would do. "What does the fox say?" asked one raven. Another one called back, "I'm dying!" They both laughed hysterically. Bernardo hoped his mother wasn't watching.
Bernardo had never felt better in his life. Normally, a battle would wear him down and he would need a night's sleep. Now he felt like he could go all night and all day. He felt like people were cheering him on, and he could practically hear their applause as he slew one raven after another.
The Iblis Stone and the Skyripper Core. Two artifacts from the time of legends. Bernardo was becoming a legendary hero, wasn't he? He had enough power to save the rebellion, but he had to understand this power, so he would not misuse it. Don't look down, he told himself. Don't look down. Ooh, sparkly, thought Bernardo.
The toads at the observatory measured the stone with their occult devices. I fed it the core of Skyripper, explained Renato. No more thievy Palan souls. But the core is not an unlimited energy source, said one toad. Another said, there's a feedback loop, you see, which could overload the stone.
Yeah, the stone doesn't actually feed on souls,
claimed a third.
but on pain of killing another sentient being. If you can truly be at peace with yourself, it would not overload.
This was all very confusing. At peace? Yes, the mountains were peaceful and quiet, but he now had the power to turn the tides. He should report to the Rebellion Council and prepare for the decisive battle.
The one thing he understood from all the Toad arguments, maybe the stone did not feed on blood or souls or rage. It fed on empathy. It fed on the pain he felt when he put an end to another being's existence. Even if that other being was a raven intent on killing him. If he could find peace, then he could use the power of the Iblis Stone without being taken over by its evil.
Yes, that was the way to defeat the Iblis Stone.
The mountains. He would go to the mountains. He could find peace there. Unfortunately, the mountains were not empty. There were ravens everywhere. No matter. He had to fight, yes, but he didn't have to be angry. Parry, dodge, slash, and breathe. Yes, focus on the rhythm, the dance of it, not on the blood or the raven's core as they died. Ah, it was working. He wasn't feeling those dark jolts of eldritch energy. He wasn't feeding the Iblis Stone. Renato wondered if his future self had commissioned these poles.
At this rate, the Imperial Army would run out of ravens.
Wished that somebody had been watching.
What's behind door number 2? think of all the artisans he was creating employment for. Truly, he was a job creator.
The stone was still silent. His mind was his own, and his heart, too. He bore them no ill will, these ravens. They were doing their job. They were expressing their nature. Dance, whirl, parry, jab, and breathe. It was all so simple, wasn't it? But something was missing. He didn't feel truly at peace. Wait. Wasn't this near where Calaveras lived? The sage would help him figure it all out.
Oh, they really ought to put a railing on this thing, he thought. Landed a claw on him. Is a very cool sword, thought Renara. No, seriously. He couldn't feel his paw anymore. As for the gate, well, You could take her, or leave her. Sorry. It's best I could do.
Ah, the road less traveled, thought Reynardo. How intriguing.
The Iblis Stone, silenced by the Sky Ripper's core, had given Reynardo enough power to challenge the Imperial fleet. But what Reynardo was seeking was inner peace. The rebellion was on the verge of extinction, but it would have to wait.
At the end of the mountain path, he found the wise Calaveras in his workshop. "Do you fix souls or only artifacts?" he asked the sage.
Does your soul need fixing?
Asked the sage. "I've been killing a lot of ravens lately," he told the sage.
You're a fox,
Said Calaveras.
and to kill birds is part of your nature. You should take joy in it. I mean, I might as well worry about eating flies. Would you like a fly?
It was true. That's what he had forgotten. The joy. Now he was ready for the final battle. The Farfarer cut through the clouds. The air had never felt so sweet since he was a child.
There it was. The dreaded Imperial fleet. He could smell wet hemp ropes ahead, wood and tar, and ravens. Even the fleet smelt good, somehow. He was ready.
He was ready.
Reynardo had it all squared away in his head.
He would kill the Emperor. Isengrim III had begun well, but he had gone mad. He was trying to invoke the lost gods by means of dark, blasphemous rituals. That was a secret. But the victims had spoken to Reynardo. The ghosts had spoken. No. No anger. Reynardo could not afford anger. It was empowering the crystal in his sword. That made him stronger, but it clouded his mind. He would not be a hero. A hero strives. Reynardo would just be one with everything. The Emperor would die, and the wheel would turn, and all would be restored without rancor, without sorrow, without pain. The mysterious sword from the east made you so fast you could catch a fly with your chopsticks. If that's what you really wanted.
His sword fu teacher used to say power gems were cheating. Stupid old fart. But the more he thought about it, and he had so much more time to think about it now that he was not worrying about the battle, killing the Emperor would not change anything. Another would take his place. Perhaps Zenobia. Perhaps the Speaker of the Rebel Council, and power would corrupt them too, and death would make grief, and grief would lead to hate. He must lead by example. Reject the violence. Reject the desire to create violence. But how? Renata had been the terror of the sandcastles when he was 2. Renato wondered if it wasn't cheaper to build bridges and stairs. Finally, he came to the Emperor's ship. The path behind him was strewn with dead ravens. The path to enlightenment. His mistake, he realized, was trying to change the world. The world would spin and the wheel would revolve whether he strove against it or not. What he had to do was nothing. He had attained enlightenment. He sat down, adopted a full lotus position, and began to meditate. And all around him, the warriors stopped fighting too. They knew. They could feel his enlightenment. They gave up fighting, dropped their weapons, and became his disciples. No, just kidding. The nearest raven stabbed him with a sword and then chopped off his head. I might not have thought this through properly. Thought Renato's head as it rolled around the deck and died. And he hadn't learned anything new this time. He'd done the same thing twice, yet expected a different outcome. There would be a way to win. Renato could feel it. He'd have to explore choices he'd never made before he could figure it all out, though. And with that, the book's pages fluttered to the beginning once again. And he fell.
The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer.
Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Renato knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong. But he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert. The Iblis Stone was hidden there. It was a dangerous artifact. It could corrupt its user into a bloodthirsty monster. Maybe he could find a way to use it, to take its power without surrendering to its wickedness. And also, his old friend Lapino needed rescuing. Of course, Renato had a pretty strong suspicion that Lapino had betrayed the rebellion. But could Renato really leave an old friend to the Ravens?
Lapino. Apparently, the Mad Rabbit had sold a Pegasus that he did not exactly own. Lapino always wiggled out of trouble, given time, but he was... Lapino had apparently managed to confuse the judge by arguing that he hadn't actually stolen a winged horse. He'd only sold it. But wait, where was the prison? The village was empty. Had everybody fled the Ravens?
Right, who wants to die first? That was odd. Renato had been here, at this exact place, at this exact time. But this time, there were so many more Ravens. Smashing things was fun. Reynardo looked around the empty village. How had he ever imagined Lupino was anything but a traitor? Any honest rabbit would have fled with the villagers.
Who leaves these chests everywhere? Wondered Reynardo. I should send him a thank you note. Ravens were landing everywhere. The advance guard. He'd better get moving. If they got to Lupino first, they'd eat him for breakfast. Or a snack. Ravens weren't picky. If they got hungry, they sometimes liked to interrogate their prisoners. Even top spies like Lupino.
Well, unless he really was a traitor, obviously. Then they'd probably pin a medal on his chest. Had that door been opened before?
Dirty and bloody, Reynardo finally reached Lupino. The rabbit was practicing his shuffle. Reynardo recognized the cards. It was Lupino's favorite.
We capture Zenobia, we find out what she knows. And that's the whole war right there. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy.
Capture the Emperor's greatest general, who also happened to be a deadly sorcerer and, oh, his only daughter? That would be worth it. On the other hand, he could still get to the core of the Sky Ripper, even if he couldn't get the whole thing. It must have great power. To make the Sky Ripper, the Transcendent Emperor had wrapped an armature around the eye of a god. Reynardo had already let that armature slip away to save Lupino's life. But even its core, the eye torn from a god, surely they could fashion a great weapon from that.
The core of the Sky Ripper? Lupino's excited. That's an actual thing that we could just go and get. You've been busy.
He sure had. Reynardo told him all the things he'd been up to. It's beautiful here, thought Reynardo. It was nice to be back with his old war buddy. All right. Lapino was a traitor. But still, he was good company. Reynardo hoped there weren't bats. Bats freaked him out.
You never knew where the road would take you, thought Reynardo.
Said Reynardo.
In your next life. Sometimes, Reynardo really hated inanimate objects. There was something sour in the air. Like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time.
You almost never saw wild gogglers together like this. The toads had to train them not to peck each other to death. So these had to be Imperial gogglers. That meant ravens were up ahead. It was a bit windy up here.
Why would anyone put his slinky collection in a strongbox, thought Renato. Were they magic slinkies?
Renato felt wrong all over. He could feel an almost palpable sickness in the air. And if the land could have tumors, they would look like these monstrous crystals. The forest was quieter than it had been. There were insects, a few birds, if you didn't count the ravens. Renato smelled sick animals and dying ones, but no healthy ones. And getting a bad feeling about this, Renato thought. Maybe Lupino was right. Maybe they should have kidnapped Zenobia instead of coming here. As he held the radiant icosahedron, Renato felt queasy, like dozens of tiny worms were nibbling his insides.
It wasn't healthy to be so close to the eye of a god.
Tell you what, said Lupino. I'll take it to the observatory. You attack the Imperial outpost.
The Imperial outpost was a vital communications node. Taking it could shatter the Empire's ability to coordinate. And it would be full of secret plans and maps and maybe even rebel prisoners. It was a good target for a hero like Renato.
But what if Lupino lost the core to the Empire? That could be a good thing, couldn't it? Was Renato ready to take that risk? Maybe it was better if he brought the core to the scientists himself. Lupino was a touchy rabbit. Renato knew that.
You're brave, I know, Renato said. But this is what I was hired to do.
Oh, well, at least let me run ahead and warn them you're coming.
Renato wondered if Lupino was up to no good. What if the rabbit warned the Empire instead? Oh, but Lupino wouldn't betray him like that. Not again. Before it'd been a fluke. As Renato watched Lupino vanish on the horizon, he could feel nausea building in him. He felt ill. Could his knees really be aching this much? But how could he have handed the core off to Lupino? That was a recipe for disaster. This chest was filled with old concert t-shirts. And something useful.
Reynardo felt worse. All his joints were aching now. He'd been through beatings that felt better than this. So the core had a kind of poison that could harm you without even touching you. That's new. Well, it had power. The rebellion needed something with power. And how was this any worse than a sword wound? Well, a death by sword was sudden and fair. This was just squalid. A piecemeal death, like old age.
These platforms were great. Reynardo wanted one for his house.
Magical energy balls, immune to the laws of gravity. The observatory was a burning hulk. Dead scientists everywhere. Reynardo found the mad rabbit cowering under a desk. The ravens, they must have known we were coming, said Lupino. How did you... Well, see, I was doing a card trick with my lucky deck, and I kind of bobbled the cards, so I went under the desk to gather them up, and boom! I guess we'll have to take the car straight to the secret base.
Reynardo wasn't sure he believed that. But Lupino was talking so fast. He always seemed to make sense.
The secret rebel base. Yes. They had engineers there. But wait. Calaveras, the sage in the mountains. Maybe he would know what to do with the naked core. The core was killing him. He needed help. The sage, Calaveras, had given him the maps to find the armature and the core. If anyone knew the true name of the Transcendent Emperor, if anyone knew how to assemble the Sky Ripper, Calaveras did. If anyone could heal Reynardo and render the core safe, at least to its bearer, surely it was he.
The base of the mountain was the only safe place for a landing. He would have to continue on foot. muscles aching.
Calaveras was a scholar, not a doctor. Could he really save Reynardo from the poison radiating from the lost god's eye he was so recklessly carrying? Oh, this was not a fun way to die. Even if he survived. No one would write ballads about the fox whose knees ached forever, would they? Not unless he paid for it. He hated paying for publicity.
How we do it, said Reynardo to himself.
It was chilling walking through the living mountains. There was always noise up ahead. Insects, birds, the croak and flutter of ravens arranging ambushes. But close by, there was only the breeze and the trickle of melting snow. As if every living thing was holding its breath for his poisonous burden to move on.
Could be the new aerobics craze. Am I right?
This would be the perfect place for a tic-tac-toe board. He needed some way to break the ice with this wall, so to speak. was the point of this gate? Did they think no one would notice the lever?
I wonder what happens if I go that way.
Time was running out for the rebellion. They might already be fighting the Imperial fleet. Everything hinged on Calaveras' ability to turn an exiled god's eye into something deadly.
The core! Splendid! Croaked Calaveras. Where's the armature?
Right, I was kind of hoping you wouldn't need it.
No, I don't. It's just a professional interest. We've got much better prismatics than the old TE ever did.
So Calaveras was an arcane engineer. He fussed at the core all day. He wrapped it with silver chains, and in front of it, he placed a huge, round ruby, so that it looked like a monstrous, floating eye. Ah, so, what is it?
Yeah, I call it the Oculum. It's my very first death ray.
And it won't poison me?
Oh, no, it's completely safe now.
Anything I should watch out for?
Yeah, try to avoid pointing at any mirrors.
As he loaded the oculum onto the Farfarer, Bernardo was a little concerned about Calaveras. People who were utterly sure of themselves, he had found, were either experts or horribly wrong. Or both. But Bernardo only needed to fire the oculum once. He only needed to destroy one ship, the Emperor's ship, and the war was over.
Bernardo plunged into the Imperial fleet. He felt the oculum humming. He no longer felt sick. This was going to be fun. Or at least, it was going to be over. Bernardo resisted the temptation to fire the oculum until the time came. He could sense its arcane energies yearning to escape the sage's wrappings. But it wasn't eating him alive. So that was a plus. He felt good about himself. He'd saved a friend, he'd helped the rebels, he'd relied on himself, but he'd listened to others. He felt like the right sort of hero. Wise, yet decisive. Calaveras had been so sure it would work. Maybe he could fire it just a few times. No harm in that, right? But only when he absolutely needed to. The portal was heavily guarded. Must go someplace they really didn't want him to go. this thing really needed a roof. Renato remembered when the Emperor had first come to the throne. He built universities and libraries. He used to invite scientists to dinner. What could have made that toad so afraid of death that he would risk bringing back the lost gods? Renato's arm was getting tired. The core was no longer eating at him, but he still felt weak. His stamina was shot. But he had the oculum. When the ravens swarmed him, it was sometimes fire its death ray. It seemed to be warming up too, firing more and more often. Maybe he should let it cool off. He decided to stop using it entirely. Goat. Take the goat across first, Renato thought. But it was too late.
odd. The Oculum was still hot to the touch. He almost thought it was getting even hotter. Well, that was ridiculous, of course. Anyway, he'd only to fire it one more time, and then he could chuck the whole contraption into the abyss. And the Emperor's ship was now in range. Reynardo squinted. He could make out the line of ravens protecting the ship. Zenobia in front, conjuring. And on the deck, yes, that was His Imperial Majesty, pacing in his golden armor. Reynardo lined up his shot and fired. Caught in the beam, the ship burst into flames. The ravens and Zenobia exploded. The Emperor, too, exploded. Reynardo waited for the beam to stop, but it only got brighter, and the Oculum hotter. Frantic, Reynardo pulled the Oculum towards the abyss. The ruby burst into flames. The shiny metal casing glowed, then melted. That was good. Now the core could cool off, right? Reynardo ran. The blast incinerated him instantly, along with both fleets. The shockwave could be felt across all Erda. That winter, with neither Empire nor rebels to rule them, the island slid into banditry. And so began the Second Age of Darkness. He should go back to some of the choices he'd faced before. Maybe there were new paths that had opened up, like those doors he was opening up all over the map that took him to new treasures and around his enemies. And he hadn't learned anything new this time. He'd done the same thing twice, yet expected a different outcome.